Welcome to the Sober Nation FM podcast, where we're putting recovery on the map. I'm your host, Jonathan Sylvester. This show is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Do you want to take your recovery to the next level? Do you want more support, community, and fellowship? Sobriety Engine is an incredible free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. You can get a ton of great tips, resources, and guidance to help you succeed in recovery and in life. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. Sober Nation FM is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle, all while supporting your sobriety, then you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Nation, let's hop right into today's episode. Today, I'll be speaking with former Green Bay Packers offensive tackle, Tony Mandarich. Thanks for coming on the show, Tony.
Jonathan, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it too. Like I just mentioned, I'm really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about your story and just things over the years and certainly what you're up to now and your recovery. And speaking of that, I'd really like to start off by hearing about what things were like before you got sober and really how you ended up finding recovery. So where would you say this all starts, just in terms of your relationship with addiction?
It's a great question. I think part of that question relies on what someone's belief is, whether it's a disease or whether it's, pull up your bootstraps and suck it up, right?
Yeah.
I believe it's a disease no different than cancer or any other disease. It'll kill you dead. It's one of the few diseases, though, I will say, if maybe the only disease where your life in recovery can be better than what your life was like before you became actively really addicted.
Wow. Yeah, true.
But, I didn't drink alcoholically, and I didn't use drugs like an addict would until I got to like Green Bay, which would have been 89. I mean, that doesn't mean obviously I didn't drink before that or drug before that. I did steroids at school, at college for 5 years, so that could be argued as, well, that was a gateway drug. If you're lowering your inhibitions or your decision making to maybe doing that, as time goes on, you're gonna, keep those inhibitions low and maybe be like, well, you know what, I can take a few painkillers or a few more painkillers and prescribed by doctor. But like on the steroids, I almost started laughing because I was going to say on steroids, my life wasn't as unmanageable as it was when I was in the midst of my addiction. But looking back, there was a lot of unmanagement.
Okay. Yeah. And I do want to ask you about the steroid use later on. I certainly want to jump more into that. For those that don't know your story, and I don't know all of your history, when did you start playing football and just what did your career look like coming up?
Well, I born and raised in Canada. When I was 11 years old, which is pretty young. I mean, if you look at 11-year-old now, you're like, wow, that's a pretty young age to make a career decision. And my decision was at that time that I was going to play in the NFL. I was going to be a pro football player, or I was going to play football as a living. I loved it. I want to say it almost consumed my love for the game was consumed by it. And growing up in the late 70s and early 80s, we only had very few channels on the TV. So we were 3 hours from Detroit, an hour and a half from Buffalo. So we would watch a lot of the Lions and a lot of the Bills, a lot of Big Ten football, and some in New York football. But I just from watching it and playing neighborhood football, I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. But my first actual shoulder pads with full equipment on football wasn't until I was a freshman in high school.
Wow.
So, by that time you're 14, 15 years old. And My brother had just left the high school that I was entering in Canada, and he had went down to Kent, Ohio, to Kent State University on a football scholarship. So he was kind of like the big name at our high school and really for any Canadian to go down to the States on scholarship to play football was a pretty impressive thing coming out of Canada, especially back then. Now it's more common. Mm-hmm. So I had like big shoes to fill, and ninth grade, I was as green as a leaf could be in the spring, right? I never really hit anybody in a football way.
Okay.
So the plan was get through high school, get a scholarship like my brother did, go to the States, hopefully, do well there playing football, and then get drafted.
Yeah.
And knowing like that's the long-term plan, the big scheme of things, knowing as time went on, we're going to have to make adjustments and you got to have some luck not to get hurt, things like that. So after my third year at my high school in Canada, White Oaks High School, I was playing well. I was a starter.
I got to know, how big were you at the time? Because for people that are listening, they might not have an idea. You're a pretty big dude. You're a pretty big dude.
So 11th grade, 11th grade, or in Canada, as we would say, grade 11.
Yeah.
I was probably like 6'4", like 250, 260.
Wow.
So then really after 3 years, and I still had in Canada at that time, you went to high school for 5 years.
Okay.
So going in after my third year of Canadian high school football, my brother and I sat down and talked, and he was already finishing his third year at Kent State. And we're like, if we're really going to make this happen, we've got to make a move here somehow. We've got to do something. We brainstormed, and the idea became, why don't I move down to Kent, Ohio, where he is, live with him, and go to Kent Roosevelt High School to get a year of exposure to American football, and hopefully keep our fingers crossed that I get noticed by scouts and get a scholarship offer somewhere.
Okay.
Now, because the high school that I went to had like five-star like football athletes that were getting scholarships. And so they had a lot of scouts coming to our games. Mm-hmm. But there's so much that goes on behind the scenes there. Like we had to go to court so my parents could sign off on guardianship to my brother. Wow. I was going to a different country, even though Canada and the US are very much alike.
Sure.
It's still going to a different country, different laws.
Yeah.
Plus that school Kent Roosevelt High School had to kind of be like, okay with it. Like, because really, if you look at it, I'm taking a spot of an American kid, American player.
Yeah.
But you know what? They were the opposite. They were absolutely freaking awesome. They welcomed me with open arms, and they were like, we'll do whatever we can to help you, get noticed and recognized. And so we did all that stuff. I moved down there, played at Kent Roosevelt, and was lucky enough to get some offers, one of them being Michigan State. And that's where I took one of my visits, and it just felt right, like the right place to go. And that's what I chose, and ended up at Michigan State. Nick Saban was a guy that recruited me because Ohio was one of his areas.
Yeah.
And he was good friends with the head coach at my high school.
Okay. Wow.
So that didn't hurt.
Yeah.
But at the time, Nick was a DB coach in college at Michigan State, and that's not to say or devalue his position, but compared to where he is now, it's
worked his way up a little bit,
right? As he could go down as one of the best college football coaches ever.
True.
And so then I went to State and kind of redrew the plan on what I wanted to happen over the next 4 or 5 years, pending if I got redshirted. And then that's where, I started taking steroids like in May of my senior year of high school. So it was like the last month of high school.
Okay.
Gotcha. I started taking some steroids, and, it was a small cycle, but regardless, it was steroids.
Gotcha.
And then I set on that path of using steroids for those next 5 years at Michigan State.
Okay. Yeah. And so I was going to ask, Man, you're a football player at Michigan State. I'm sure there was like a little partying here and there, but it sounds like so there was nothing really that crazy going on until you actually get to the big leagues, right?
For me personally,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, there was, I would say there was some like crazy stuff. Like, I wouldn't say that it's normal to cheat on a drug test.
Okay. Yeah.
So that, I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
that's not normal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I shouldn't even laugh at that. Thank God I can look back at it and learn my lesson with
Sure.
that mistake. But I, cheated on the drug test for the Rose Bowl, and I cheated on the drug test for the Gator Bowl the year after.
Okay.
And the NCAA testing at the time was very, very mediocre.
Sure.
And I'm sure that had a lot to do with budgets and athletics and all that stuff. So you really only got tested if you went to a bowl game,
Oh, okay.
Okay. And but yeah, that's where I obviously ramped it up over 5 years there.
Yeah.
And, surrounded myself with not people that were there, but people that were from out of state that really knew their stuff on how to do cycles of steroids, as safe as possible.
Yeah.
And maximize your benefit, and it's like, no, that's not rationalization. It was wrong. Period. It was wrong.
Yeah.
But it was like, and I knew it was wrong, and I knew it was breaking the rules, but I knew I wanted to be the best, and I was willing to take that risk.
Right.
And I was willing to take the risk of getting caught.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about just getting drafted and actually going into the NFL.
It was, first and foremost, it was an honor, even though you'd never know it at the time. It was an honor to be drafted by the Green Bay Packers. I mean, one of the greatest organizations in the NFL, with tradition, with loyalty from fans, just a phenomenal place. And when I look back at interviews or things that I had said and done and the way I acted during negotiations, it's really kind of, in a way, I look at it, it's like, I don't regret really anything. Sure. Because I had to go through that to get to where I'm at today, and today I'm good with me. But I was an arrogant SOB.
So I don't have the quote in front of me, but
I was reading
through your Wikipedia and kind of laughing a little bit. Like, I'm sure you can find some of the stuff humorous now, but it was like, he referred to Green Bay as a village, and some other, and I just, and I didn't want to assume anything, but having, heard a little bit about you, and I kind of thought that maybe you would look back on that and see like, hey, okay, maybe there was a little bit of an ego there.
Maybe there was a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe there was a lot of me playing God.
Wow.
And thinking I had all the answers, not just for me, but for you too. It was in so many ways, it was out of control. And my ego was just, I started to believe my press. And you know what? A lot of this stuff, look, a lot of the stuff was true. Look, I did do the bad things, and I did do the good things.
Sure.
So I did them both, but that I couldn't inside. I couldn't differentiate the two and be kind of like, stay grounded, stay humble, keep your head down, keep grinding, keep working hard.
Yeah.
Instead, I was like trying to get as big a contract as possible, because I knew it was a short-lived career. Even if you play 10 years, it's a short-lived career.
Yeah.
And, I was like, offensive linemen don't make enough money. Okay. So I was like, I want to kind of break figure threshold. And that wasn't my main motivation. I'd be lying if I said it was for the other offensive linemen in the future to make more money. It was for me, but it was like, but this is going to open the gates to where other offensive linemen, even the next year, can renegotiate or negotiate if their contracts are up for 7-figure salaries that deserve it, that were Pro Bowlers already.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So now you're in the league, and give us just an idea of what your career looks like and how this leads into the drug use, because at some point I guess you get into painkillers, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how did all that actually come about?
So I stopped taking steroids after like the Gator Bowl, which would have been like the first, well, I think we played New Year's Eve.
Okay.
So it was New Year's Eve of 88 going into January 1st of 89. And I didn't take them for like, I want to say 12 weeks.
Okay.
Because the combine was coming up.
Oh, okay.
And if, I knew if I test positive at the combine, it's gonna lower your value. It's kind of like if you're even today, I mean, you see guys getting in trouble off the field, it lowers their value. It doesn't matter how good an athlete you are.
Yeah.
So my thing was, make sure that I test clean, and I wasn't going to chance cheating on a drug test at the combine, because I didn't know what kind of test they were doing, because I didn't know if they were doing blood and urine or what they were doing, but I knew it would be way more sophisticated than college, because they did have budgets, big budgets.
Yeah, sure.
So I got off the steroids, did my combine, did well at the combine, got back on steroids, because now the next time I'm really going to get tested is when I sign or that the big camp that comes up in August. Well, we were so far in negotiations as far as what we wanted. I got on some steroids that were water-based. So when I stopped taking them, they'd be out of my system in 3-4 weeks.
Okay.
Instead of oil-based, which takes longer, and half-life, and all these things, just stuff that matters, that really doesn't matter in this conversation.
Sure.
But I got back on them, and then to play it safe, I got off of them probably 2 months even before I signed. And I signed September 5th, I want to say, of 89, which was going into the first week of the opener. So I missed all the mini camps. I missed all the training camp, everything, which was not a great way to set yourself up starting out as a rookie. And then talked all that, that smack that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And then some. But the press conference I did, when I did sign, I did say that every village needed a village idiot. Which kind of made amends, like kind of mended things a little bit, But the bottom line is, look, they draft you to play and perform, not to make friends. And that's in that transition right there, in that like, say, even that 1 month period, I started filling that void with painkillers and with alcohol. Now I would say I was more at that moment more of a drug addict than an alcoholic. I didn't feel like I was drinking alcoholically, but within a year I was.
Okay. And so how did this actually come into the picture? I mean, you hear, we hear this connection all the time now, right? With guys in the NFL or guys that are athletes and going to painkillers, just trying to, and I know things were different back in the day. I hear stories about, guys that were literally, chewing up painkillers like at halftime and stuff. Right. And getting shot up by trainers with all kinds of stuff just to keep playing. Yep. Was it out of boredom? Was it out of what led to the actually just starting to take him? Was there an injury you were dealing with or what?
Well, fundamentally really keeping it simple. And I've looked back at this thousands of times in my life.
Okay.
It's a disease.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not going to crutch on the disease and say, well, I have a disease, that's why I didn't pan out in Green Bay.
Right.
So I'm blaming it on the disease. No, that's not an excuse, because you have a choice to recover. You do have a choice. I just didn't think I had a choice because I was so deep into it.
Okay.
And yeah, it started with, you're going to have shoulder ache, bad back or knee or something. And the painkillers, at least in Green Bay, they weren't flung around like you would see in movies.
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't like there's a big bowl of painkillers everybody just grabs from. I mean, I wish there was at the time, but there wasn't.
Okay.
But you could get creative and on ways of getting stuff from different doctors, different pharmacies. Nothing was networked with internet. You're basically conning people, conning doctors, conning pharmacists for prescription drugs, and you're still getting drugs from the team. But each one thinks they're individually giving, right? Because it's just a big con game. And that's, unfortunately, that's one of those side effects of this disease, is that lying, cheating, stealing, and a bunch of, they're kind of almost like go to a moral thing of side effects, where, and then so people get, even last week I spoke to somebody who was struggling. I spoke with their family, and I had said to them, look at your son like you're looking at a cancer patient. Would you be mad at that cancer patient if he had cancer? No, you wouldn't. Well, it's really the same thing, in my belief. It's that person has a disease, and they're at that point where, and the big book talks about it, and I'll say 12-step. I won't talk about the actual name of it, but the 12-step program in the book, it talks about there's that jumping off place. But when you're in it, that if you stop, you're going to die.
Yeah.
But if you continue, you're going to die.
Right.
So what are your options? It's like, what's option C? There is no option C. So, that's a difficult place to be in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's, directly, unfortunately, a lot of, not showing up for stuff, being late, not being employable. There's so many things that go with that. Like if somebody has cancer, somebody has diabetes, they don't become a thief.
Yeah, right.
Well,
and I think one of the sayings that I've heard that I really like, there's just so many good one-liners and stuff in recovery, right? But is hate the disease, not the addict, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's a really good way to think about it. Although, I know that's a hard.
It's hard. It is hard. It is hard to understand that, especially for somebody who's related to or married to or has that sibling or whatever that is, and they're not the ones with the problem. The other ones are the ones with the problem, and they don't get it. And it's totally makes sense that you don't get it, because why are they acting so messed up?
Yep.
And one of the things that I, in the last couple of years, have started to do is to say to certain people that don't understand, I say, look, whether you're love sugar or not, I want you to cut out 100% of all the sugar in your diet for the next 2 weeks. And you may not be a ginormous, dessert person or a sugar fiend or anything, but you'll nibble on a little bit of this, a little bit of that has sugar in it. If you cut out 100% sugar, and when you start shaking and getting aggravated and irritated, that's the closest thing I can relate to somebody who's not an addict on what it feels like. Now, if you get somebody that does indulge daily on desserts and stuff,
they'll notice.
Well, they'll in 3 days be like, I get it, I understand, and then they go have their dessert, and it's like, well, wait, just don't do the dessert. It's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, absolutely. So now so walk me through this. Like, what is the progression like with you start taking the pain pills? You don't feel like, initially you're drinking as much. It sounds like it's more about the pills. The drinking's just kind of there. What is the progression looking like overall, and how is it affecting your career?
Is that, directly affecting the career. Opiates or the painkillers I was on, and even alcohol, are depressants. They're downers. They're not uppers. They're not speed. but I was like, this thing makes me feel like when I take 5 or 6 painkillers, like I feel euphoric.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I feel great. So which means I'm looser, which means I'm faster and quicker and all this, but it ain't showing on film. Right.
Okay.
During a game, it's like,
Okay.
why are you moving so slow? Because
Wow.
you're lethargic, you're in slow motion, and you don't realize it.
Mm.
But the disease, progresses, as does tolerance level, your physical, chemical, biologically and physiology and everything. It's like your receptors, everything, your body builds a tolerance to that drug or whatever it is.
Sure.
And then it wants more to get the same effect. And you're constantly chasing that high that I had in the beginning. Because if drinking in the beginning wasn't fun to a degree, and if taking a few painkillers with some alcohol wasn't fun, I never would have done it. I never would have had a problem.
Yeah.
But I felt so good doing it. I got to the point where I was like, well, I'm going to do this even when we don't go to practice. I'm going to take some painkillers when it's our day off because it makes me feel good.
Gotcha.
And then the tolerance level goes up. The progression of the disease happens, like literally like the progression of it internally. And you wake up and literally, I'm talking literally, I woke up one day and I was like, how did I get to this point? I'm taking 50, 60 painkillers a day.
Wow.
And that was still 3-4 years before I got sober.
Wow. So now where does this have to lead? Like what's going on in your personal life? What's going on? At some point, like as I read it, the Packers say like that there was an off-field injury of some kind, right?
Yeah, well, there was. I mean, there was a concussion.
Okay.
There was a concussion in our first preseason game of my 4th year there. So it was 92, which, sidelined me for a few weeks. A few weeks of preseason. Okay. Stepped back on the field during practice. And once I started moving, it's full tilt, right? I was still foggy, and I would say there was probably some fogginess that was accompanied from the concussion, also accompanied by the painkillers.
Sure.
But ended up, they put me on something called the PUP list, physically unable to perform, which was I'm not sure they still might have that list in the NFL. But what it does is it puts you on a list where you can be off the roster for 6 weeks, where they can bring another player on. I mean, you still make your money and everything, but it kind of gives the team a break, because if they put you on IR, injured reserve, you're done for the year. You can't come back. That's just the way the rules were. And so they put me on PUP. I came off of PUP, and first couple hits in practice, and it was like my head was ringing again.
Wow. So
then within a week, they put me on injured reserve, and there was 10 games left in the season. So they put me on injured reserve, and so I was like done for the year, knowing I was done for the year.
Okay.
And then the usage became greater. And I was even, made aware that, look, you got to be careful with painkillers and head injuries. Especially in the beginning especially in the initial time that you have the head injury, because the painkiller could mask something that could kill you, that you would feel pain for, and you could say that you feel this pain, and they could, address it instead of not feeling anything and being totally numb, and then, you die from it.
Wow. So now what exactly happens where the Packers are like, okay, we've just got to let you go?
So my contract was, I had signed a 4-year deal. The first 3 years were under one coaching regime. Then my 4th year, another coaching regime comes in, because the first ones all got fired. And then after my contract expires, they have a choice to either renegotiate a new one or to cut you loose as a free agent.
Okay.
And they had until, like, I want to say February to tell me. And I was already living in Michigan at the time, and they had called me up, and I didn't know if I was going to resign with them.
Right.
At that time, my addiction was so deep. Like, I was blaming the Packers, I was blaming media, I was blaming everybody. That it was definitely not my fault. It was everybody's fault but mine. But obviously I was the problem. I was I was the common denominator in all those problems and issues. So they had called me up and said that, that they're gonna let me go as a free agent, and they were professional about it. They were pros, right?
Yeah.
And they said, we're not going to resign you. So, just so you know, we're giving you the info and letting you know that you're free to go anywhere, to play anywhere you want to play. And that was February of 93.
Okay.
Or late January, early February 93.
So you're pretty deep in your addiction here, and I may be way off base, but I'm just going to step into your shoes for a minute, and just knowing that headspace too, with the painkillers, because that was kind of my drug of choice, if you want to call it that. I'm just thinking, I've spent my whole life working towards like what I want to do, and and I get caught up in this, this whole thing, and my career doesn't go the way I thought it would. And I had, all these dreams and expectations and everything. And now here I am, and I've been cut loose, and I have this, this massive drug problem on top of that. That had to be a pretty bad combination, I would think.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, right? I mean, what it feels like. Because for you, like, if you're in recovery, it's like, listen, you felt the same pain I did. And I felt the same pain you did. Just because mine happened to be on the front page because of my job doesn't mitigate the pain to be less. That emotional pain and that obsession for the next high is the same as probably yours was.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that people in recovery can relate, and they bond so quickly, on they know where the other person's been and what they've gone through and what they've done to pull to pull themselves out of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was bad. And I thought, 4 years prior to that, I was on top of the world as far as of career. Like, right before I went to Green Bay, I got, was in the first round draft choice, first offensive lineman to make, 7-figure contract, all this stuff. And then 4 years later, in a nice way, being kind of like, onward, move on, right? Like, getting kicked. I don't want to say kicked out of the league, but in a nice way, getting kicked out.
Yeah. Pushed aside, kind of.
Yeah. And was really like what I would today consider I was a cancer on the team. It's like, I was not a good guy. Like, I wasn't like maliciously bad to teammates or anything, but I was not like a guy you don't want an active alcoholic or a drug addict on your team. It's just, I mean, as you know, it's in any business, even in your own circle of 5-6 people that you hang out with, what's coming. Eventually there's going to be bad stuff coming, trouble, drama, whatever the case may be. So I thought it couldn't get worse after they let me go. Of course, it's a phrase you probably should never say. And, February 8th of 93, my brother died at 31.
Wow.
From cancer. And that was tough. That was rough. And then it wasn't 12 months after that, my parents divorced after 42 or 43 years of being married. And these are not excuses.
Sure.
These were kind of like things where you would think, and I knew at the time that the drugs were my problem and the alcohol. Like, I knew that those were two things were the problem, and I had to straighten it out, but I didn't know how. And then I started on this like bad losing streak with them letting me, first of all, having a horrible career in Green Bay. Then the Packers letting me go. Then my brother passing. Then my parents divorcing.
Yeah.
And, you always think mom and dad are home, right? But then they're divorcing. And it's like, what the heck's going on here? And I would think that, I think a normal person would think one of those would have been a wake-up call to be like, hey, stop, slow down, or stop the intake of chemicals, get your stuff together,
Right.
and start helping whatever, participating in life. Instead, the opposite happened. My doses went up, and I wanted to get number and number, to get away from that pain.
Wow.
And then continued to do that until, March 23rd of 95.
I get that 100%. I mean, a short snippet in my story is that a really good friend of mine died and in a drunk driving accident, and yeah, just wanted to feel numb. And I get what you were saying about those, those not being excuses. I will say that for me, it subconsciously, at least, it was a good excuse to keep using,
At
because it was just
the
like,
time, absolutely.
he's
Yeah.
gone and
Yeah.
life sucks. And
Right.
yeah. So where does this actually have to lead? Like what is the, I don't know. Some people don't like referring to it as a rock bottom, but what has to happen for you to start turning things in the other direction?
So you're talking, we're talking March of 95. I get, so March 23rd of 95, and I was released in like January, February of 92. So pretty much was out of the league 3 years and drank and drugged for 3 more years.
Okay.
And, there was a lot of just not good, healthy living going on. I mean, as far as like being, doing the right thing, I wasn't employable. I was not reliable enough to show up to work anywhere, let alone, in the NFL, which was my dream. So a good friend of mine who was not in the program, had just pretty much sat down and had a talk with me. It was a week before March 23rd. It was maybe 4 or 5 days before. And he had said the same thing hundreds of people had said to me before, but this time it clicked and I was ready to hear it. Because there was a lot of people, and I've said this before more than a dozen times. There was a lot of people in that organization in Green Bay that tried to help me.
Okay.
They kind of knew something was wrong, but I don't think they could put their finger on it. And if you're not kind of educated on alcoholism or drug addiction, like unless you're recovering from it, like you'll spot one in a heartbeat.
Right.
But if that's not part of your life, you're like, why is that person struggling so bad? Does he have a mental illness or just what's going on?
Right. Yeah.
So there was a lot of people that had tried to help me, and even doctors that would give me scripts that finally cut me off and said, I think you have a problem. And I, would be like, there's no way I have a problem. Right. And looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like what a fool I was. But it was, the catalyst was my friend talking to me. I have had a ton of respect for, still have a ton of respect for. And I wish I could say he said something super profound and these bright lights showed up, but he basically said, if you don't stop what you're doing, and if you don't change what you're doing, and if you don't stop taking all these pills and drinking all this alcohol on a daily basis, it'll kill you. And you've been sitting on this couch, because it was at my house, and you've been sitting on this couch for 3 years now doing this. And I was like, wait a second, what do you mean 3 years? And he's like, well, since you've been out of the NFL. And I was like, what do you mean I've been out of the NFL 3 years? I've been out of the NFL like 9 And he's like, no, it's been 3 years. So like, you're talking 1993. So maybe the internet was like super infant, but there was no like, hey, go to your computer and check the calendar.
Right.
I had to get the calendar off the kitchen wall. And I looked and I was like, oh my God, it's 1995.
Wow. And
I knew, and I had known that the drugs and alcohol were the problem probably for 4 years prior to that day.
Okay.
And I had tried hundreds of different ways to stop and couldn't do it. But it was always on my own. I never tried to go to a 12-step place. I just tried to look, I got the willpower of an ox, so I can do this, or I can make this happen. And it's one of the things in life that, kicked my ass up and down the street and kept doing it until I was willing to be like, you know what, I need help.
Yeah.
And he said, are you open to trying treatment? And I said, I'll do anything at this point.
Wow.
Because I have nothing to lose. I've already lost everything. And he had called down to Brighton, Michigan, at Brighton Hospital, and they did have a bed available like in 3 days. So I couldn't get there right away, but I was in treatment, voluntarily in treatment 3 days later.
Wow. And so you go to treatment, and then it sounds like at some point you get involved with the 12-step program. Did you just kind of jump right into that, or how did that work out?
So it got introduced to, the most I knew about 12-step programs were things I've seen in movies.
Sure. Yeah.
Like a snippet here. I didn't know much about it. I couldn't tell you what any of the steps were. Had an assumption that, a quote unquote alcoholic was a 70-year-old guy in an alley, homeless, with a big overcoat on in the middle of summer with a brown paper bag, right? Has a wine bottle in it. That was my stereotype of what those meetings would be like, full of those people.
Okay.
And come to find out that disease does not discriminate. Whether you're male, female, tall, short, fat, athlete, politician, black, white, Asian, doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't care. It'll kill you dead. And so it was I got introduced to the 12 steps and a 12-step meeting about my 4th or 5th day in treatment at that treatment facility. They had like an alumni meeting where people that went through that treatment center would come back, and they had a meeting. And the guy at the podium talked about stuff that I was like, has this guy been following me around? Because he's telling me my story. Right. And so it was like, I was relating, and I was like thinking, okay, I still shaken from detoxing and stuff. But there was a huge thing that happened on day 11. And I was only in treatment for 17 days. But at day 11, we had a day off from the meeting and from counseling meetings and all that. And we gathered in the lounge. And at that time, you were allowed to smoke and use nicotine. So say out of all the people that were inpatient, say close to 40, I'd say like 37, 38 of them were smokers. And me and one other guy chewed tobacco. So we're all kind of sitting around telling each other stories of our, train wrecks. And some of this stuff was so much nonsense and just so ridiculous. But at the core of the story, it didn't matter what that person's job was or career was, or whether they were soccer mom or politician at the state or federal level or a judge. It doesn't matter what it was, a ditch digger. The core of the story was the same. And the emotions and the feelings that we all felt were the same. And the pain that we felt were the same. But some of the stories were hilarious, right? Sure. So I was like, I have to get out of this room because my eyes are burning from all the smoke in the air, because it's winter still in Michigan and it's fairly cold out. So like the room, like cut the smoke with a knife. It was so thick of cigarette smoke. So I was like, I need to get out of this room because my eyes are burning from all the smoke. It was like being in a bar, right? And so I went back to my room in the hospital, sat down on the side of the bed. And that's where like what I would consider like a major catalyst happened. My stomach had hurt from laughing. And it's the first time I could remember my stomach hurting from laughing in a decade. And I thought to myself, if someone were to tell me that 11 days into this, that I would be laughing that hard without the use of drugs or alcohol, I'd say that'd be impossible. And I was teachable enough to be like, whatever it is, I'm going to just soak it up like a sponge, and I'm going to dig my nails into it, because this is a good feeling. And was there for 6 more days. And then went back up home to, Upper Michigan, not the UP, but Upper Michigan, and did intensive outpatient for 6 months. So I met with a counselor every, like, twice a week for an hour or 2 hours. And then after those 6 months, just continued with meetings. But I was doing meetings from the first day I got out. I averaged over a meeting a day for the first 5 years of my sobriety.
Wow. What would you say was the biggest thing that you struggled with early on in sobriety, just as you were getting started?
Oh man, early on I didn't. It wasn't until now. Because now it's like, okay, you're over 26 years sober. You should be here by now, right?
Okay.
Like, I've gotten a lot of stuff accomplished, more, that I had set goals for, and I'm not there yet, but that's okay. It's just taking longer than planned. The key is that I didn't have to go back out. But in early sobriety, I like, when I read step 2, and step 2 talks about insanity, right? I was like, does not apply to me.
Okay.
Because I was on such a high from feeling good naturally, that I still could, and plus I hadn't worked the steps yet and gotten and dug deep and peeled the onion, that I didn't really see, the wreckage. And then as months went on, like at 6 months, did a legitimate 4th step, and then started to realize the wreckage. But still I was like, okay, well, there's some of the stuff you can't do anything about. There's just nothing you can do to make it right.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff that you can make right and that you can do. So I was lucky enough to be surrounded by men in the program that were very, I don't want to say hardcore. They were just very fundamental about it. And they would be the guy that if you said, hey, I feel like I want a drink, they'd be like, okay, well, you know where the bar is, go ahead. And that's not the answer that you're expecting to hear from somebody.
Yeah.
You're expecting them to go, oh, please don't, please don't. But it's like, look, if you want to wreck your life again, have at it. Those are the types of guys they were. And it may sound like twisted, but it was done with a lot of love.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, hey man, this is not a game. This is life or death, literally.
I can appreciate that. And I think things most of the time anywhere are a little different now. What I appreciate that is the same thing that I think I appreciated in what you were describing about the conversation that your friend came to have with you. Yeah. And it sounds like these were guys that were being direct. Yeah. And just kind of no bullshit. Here's what's going to happen. And, I've come to see, I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned in this deal is really how important that is, especially with people that are new. And not that I would necessarily say, hey, fine, then go take a drink. But, the truth is that if I'm not going to keep anyone sober, but at the same time, if there is something that needs to be said to someone that I feel like I should say, that could benefit them, then I should probably say it, because in my experience, sometimes you never see those people again.
Right.
And there is a possibility that maybe something you say makes a difference.
Yes. And it could be the thing that you think is so like just irrelevant or just something small, but to that person, it was what they needed to hear. And it was the way you phrased it, or just the way you talked or addressed it, because it was crucial in their life at the time.
Yeah, that's
and I've felt that from other people, where I've said, I know you don't know this, but 2 years ago when you spoke at this meeting, you said this one thing that I was struggling with, and I've now worked through it. And they had no idea.
Sure.
They were like, you were struggling with that? And I was like, yeah. And and I think it's important to let people know that.
Yeah.
Because your true friends, and so, yeah, there's a difference between having friends and then, your circle that you surround yourself with, whether they're in the program or not in the program.
Mm-hmm.
There are great people in this world that never have a drinking problem,
Yeah.
that do the
Very
right thing,
true.
right?
Yeah. Very true.
So someone that is really, really, really your friend and feels that, you're very important and you feel the same way with them, will be honest with you and say, hey, look, I love you. And I'm sharing this with you not to cause drama or controversy, but I'm sharing this with you because this is what I see from the outside, from my world. This is what I'm seeing you do. And I've had this conversation with people both ways in my sobriety, even in the last, 5 years. And it's been like, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I care about you. And I don't want to see you veer off the path. And I'm not saying it to criticize you. I'm not saying it to be talking down or anything. I'm just saying it because I love you. Because somebody that really is just an acquaintance will kind of be like, you know what? Not my problem. I'm not putting my nose in their business.
Yeah, true.
And not that that's wrong, but that's what an acquaintance is versus somebody who is your inner circle.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, the way I see it is if I care about someone, I would rather risk hurting their feelings or
Yeah.
pissing them off a little bit and they don't talk to me or whatever than just
Yeah.
not saying the thing that, that I'm feeling very strongly needs to be said. I get that. And that's a good point. I do want to switch gears here and I want to ask you about your book, which is titled My Dirty Little Secrets, Steroids, Alcohol, and God. So why did you decide to write the book?
I released it in 2009. So I was already sober, for 15 years or 14 years.
Yeah, 14 years. Yeah.
I wanted to write the book as soon as I retired from Indy, which would have been in 90, like I retired in 98. So, or that was my last season. So 99, in the spring of 99, I retired and I was like, everybody, like the comeback was good and I had made a lot of things right.
Okay.
But still, even like, I'll be the first to admit, I didn't live up to the expectations I had set for myself and that a lot of people expected out of me. But I had slayed my demons by going back and playing without drugs in my system and playing sober and doing all these things. So when I got injured and retired, I wanted to write the book. And I had talked to two major publishers.
Okay.
Because my name was still fresh, right, in the league with just being out of the league and stuff and coming back to play after being gone for 3 years. And both of them independently said to me in conversation, in a nice way, like, if you don't name names and kind of throw people under the bus, the book's not going to sell as well.
Yeah.
And I said, well, the book is not about that. The book is about my mistakes.
Yeah. And they wanted dirt, basically.
They wanted dirt. I mean, they wanted the story plus the extra dirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not responsible for the actions of what any other player did.
Sure.
I'm responsible for my actions. So I said, it's and really there was a huge thing where people still thought the reason he didn't succeed was because of the steroids. Because everybody's focus was on the steroids.
Yeah.
So much that they never saw all the side effects of all the painkillers, all the alcohol abuse, and all the other things that were going on behind the scenes. And those were between 1989 and 1995 were the roughest years of my life. And that's when I was in the deepest with the addiction.
Yeah.
And so I also wanted people to know, look, steroids could have been the gateway. What I did was wrong. I had already done interviews where I said that was what I did was wrong. But in an interview, you can't really say all the stuff you want to say is like you can in a book, where you can pick out the good details, events that you do want to talk about, and the ones that are kind of like redundant or whatever, just leave out. So it came down to them, about revenue, and I get it. They're a business.
Yeah.
They're in business. I get it. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to the bus. It's never been me, and it never will be me. And I won't do that.
Yeah.
Even like I'll I'll, eat the whatever and take the beating and keep my mouth shut, because I'm not rolling on anybody, and I'm not naming names of people, and what they may have been doing might have been, cheating the system or whatever, but that's on their conscience, not mine.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, it's about this story, let people know what really happened, take the accountability, and I knew that it would help somebody. It's like, I would say, boy, if it helps one person, it'd be great. I knew it would help more than one person. It might help two, right? So, but I figured somebody like a soccer mom could relate to that story if you take some of the semantics out of football. Instead of football, you change the word, the emotions, the feelings, the pain, the struggle, the chase of the high, all the stuff across the board of addiction and alcoholism is the same. Doesn't matter if you're male, female, an adult or youth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Looking for the similarities are there.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
And absolutely. One thing I wanted to ask you about just before we start to wrap up here is because some of the viewers and listeners may not know about this, but you were talking about just a moment ago, like not living up to, your own expectations, expectations that other people had of you, and so on and so forth. And I think we can't kind of escape the visual example of that in your two Sports Illustrated issues, right?
Yeah, right.
So for the listeners that haven't seen this, so there's the first issue when you were a rookie, and man, you were just like jacked. And it says the incredible bulk, right?
Right.
And then I don't know exactly when it was released, but after your career, right? Or after you left Green Bay, it
was actually when I got put on IR. So it was like towards the end of my last season there.
Okay. So then they released another issue, and it was the incredible bust, and it was you, and it had that first issue kind of transposed, like a little bit smaller, the same picture. When you think about that, and just like you said, these, this journey you've gone on, and looking back at it now, and I know you've obviously you've given so many hours of thought, and now so many sober hours of thought too. What are the lessons that you've kind of taken away from this journey, would you say? And just looking back on all of this.
I would say that the two biggest things that are like in the center of my world right now, or that are at least very evident and for me very obvious, and I may share it with people and they may not think that that's the most obvious thing, but it's me. It was my life, it was my story, so I know what it was that when that issue came out, it was bad. It was bad. And I mean, it was embellished bad too by the writer, which didn't help, but that's not her fault. I still had a core of the bad that she could embellish on.
Yeah, right.
But it was bad, and it was me. And that's traumatic. And at the time, being on the cover of SI was a big deal. Not that it's not now, but it was a bigger deal then because the internet, there really was no other. Like they were like the kings of sports. If SI said it, you know, it wasn't gospel, but it was very well respected because they wouldn't just send any, you know, researcher or person to do an interview with you or whatever, write a story about you. So it was a main source of information. So when everybody saw the big, this is what's about to happen, this greatness is about to happen, and then, you know, I never said what they wrote on that cover because they wrote the incredible bulk. They said, and I think they said maybe the best college prospect offensive lineman to ever come out of college. I didn't say that. They did. They wrote it on the cover. I may have thought it and I may have believed it.
Yeah.
But I never said it and was never quoted saying it. So then the train wreck happens for 4 years. They write that bus thing and they're right. I mean, what they wrote was right. It was correct. It was accurate. Some of that, you know, writer just, you know, expanding on the story. It's on stuff that just wasn't, some of that stuff was just embellished more to make the story sound worse in certain areas, but it was a bad story.
Yeah, sure.
Like it was bad on me. But that gave me, once I got sober and once I got the opportunity and I was lucky enough to go back and play, it gave me a perspective that was unbelievable because I got to play in the NFL as an active drunk and an active addict. And I got to play in the NFL with a crystal clear mind and looking through crystal clear eyes. And it's a lot easier to do it when you're crystal clear, but it's still very tough, right? So that perspective for me is priceless. How many people get that perspective? Like, usually if you're out after 3 years, and there have been players that have been out that long and come back and play, and there's been players that have been out, I think maybe even 4 or 5 years and have come back to play. And well, I consider myself extremely lucky to have gone back to play, had the epic rise, the epic fail, and then a modest comeback and a nice transition into the real world after the retirement. So that perspective of life in sport is priceless. Like I can't tell you how priceless that is.
That's awesome.
And today, and I've felt this way for the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years. Football, listen, I'm not going to deny it. It was a big part of my life. I love watching football. You know, this last season was a little odd because of COVID and stuff, but I still am a huge football fan.
Sure.
Still a huge Michigan State fan. But looking now in like the really big scheme of things, football was really kind of like a platform and a detail that I could use to carry the message. And that message doesn't just have to be about sobriety. It could be about overcoming adversity. It could be about, you know, some of the things I talk about, you know, making a plan. And I've refined these things when I speak, when I do my public speaking stuff. I'll talk to companies about adversity because salespeople constantly get no's. No, I don't want a deal. No, right? And how many no's before they start to doubt themselves?
Yeah.
And it's like, you just got to keep grinding. It's, you know, so I was lucky enough to live all that great stuff and all that painful stuff. And the tragedy would be as if I didn't learn from that stuff and continue to act that way. That being said, that doesn't mean I'm a perfect human. I make mistakes. The key is the focus constantly on the self-improvement and self-development of oneself, not for me, but so I can be of better service to you or my neighbor.
Yeah.
And that neighbor doesn't have to be in a program. That neighbor could be like having two extra bags of groceries that they can't carry up because they've got 10 bags in their hands already. And I'd be like, hey, you want me to grab those for you? And that's like, a small little example, but it's like, some people might be like, well, that's like, when I was growing up, it was talked about helping an older lady cross the street at a light. Well, you know what? That stuff matters. That stuff carries a lot of noble, like great, what I consider great characteristics in a human, or that humans have that we don't show as much as we need to have that noble character, and to be like being a man today. The definition of being a man today for me, and I think for a lot, and I think society's changed it. And from being a man when I was in college is like epically, the spectrum is different, because then it was about being ginormous, I'll kick it. It was like WWE, right?
Macho guy. Yeah.
Right. And now it's about, hey, be strong enough to stand up and dig your heels in on what you believe in. And don't be afraid of other people and what they say about you, or what they're saying about you, or what they're saying about that other person, or whatever. Yeah. It's like, and I do that, and it's a lot of times it's not popular. And I try to do it in as much of a loving way as I can, because I like things black and white. I think a lot of us do, like simple, right? Fundamental. It's either this way or it's this way.
Yeah.
Well, there's obviously, you can't live that way. I found out after I left the NFL, you can't really live that way. There's got to be a gray area. Well, the gray area has a name. It's called tolerance. It's called tolerance, and of what you are willing to tolerate in others or yourself, or how, what you're willing to accept, what you're not willing to accept. Why does that make me angry when that person does that? Well, for me and you, probably the first thing that happens is, what in me do I not like that they're doing?
Yeah, right.
What is it that I got to change in me? But it's not always that. It is like that 50% of the time, but it's not always that. And so to me, I look at football as, I'm not going to discount it and say, oh, it was just football. It was awesome. I loved it. It was a dream come true. And then it was a train wreck. And then it was an opportunity where, after burning all the bridges, so I was lucky enough that somebody gave me an opportunity and gave me a chance. And that's all I needed, was a chance. And I knew, even if I didn't make it, just because they sign you doesn't mean you make it. Even if I get cut, at least I tried, and at least I did it sober. And I could walk away then with a clear conscience, going, you know what? I gave it my best, without any steroids, without any alcohol, without any painkillers, and it wasn't good enough. And I could walk away with peace in my soul.
Yeah.
And luckily I made it, started for 2.5 years, retired with an injury, and walked away peacefully, because I had surrounded myself with men of great character and people of great character that held me accountable.
Oh, I really love that. Yeah. I get that. That's pretty awesome.
And they remind me, that, I have an obligation today to carry that message, whether that person's in the program or not program. Just carry the message of doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And do it with your actions, and just do it with how you walk, how you talk, and what you do in your life on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I hit my knees every day, in the morning, because I know if I don't, it's like, all right, I think today I got it, I'm good. And I don't want to take that chance.
I hear you. I hear
it's
you.
like, what I'm doing is working.
Exactly.
So I'm not going to mess with it.
I know. I get that. Well, before we wrap up, I do want to ask if there's maybe one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the sober nation, whether it's for, someone that's thinking about getting sober, someone that's maybe newly sober, or has been around a while and is struggling. If maybe there's something you'd like to share with them.
Yeah, a lot of times you hear in meetings, people come in, whether they're there by the court or whether they're there by their family kind of pressuring them, or whether they're just there to check it out. And it's their turn to talk, they say their name and they say, I'm not sure if I am or if I'm not, but I'm just here to check things out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, trust me, if you're there, chances are you almost 100% you are, because I've never found myself in a ladies bridge card tournament. Why? Because I'm not a lady and I don't play bridge.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't go to a place like that and sit back and go, I just want to check things out just to see if maybe I like to play bridge, with ladies and see if that fits in with my schedule. So the chances are that the person is, but only they can make that decision. Yeah. And they can make that thing, and they can, and they should know that they're in a place where it's a safe place that they can ask questions that, are vulnerable. But if it was like, I don't like to give advice because all I can do is share an experience. And the one thing I would say is give it a chance, because if you're already contemplating on going, or if you're going because you have to have a paper signed by the court, those things aren't by accident, So if you're going to be there voluntarily or by the nudge from the judge, it's like, give it a chance, like give it an honest chance, give it 30 days for yourself and see if your life gets better and see if you feel better. And if you don't have to stay.
Yeah.
If you decide that you're not that, nobody's going to tell you are. Mm-hmm. But give it a chance, because in the beginning, our heads are foggy still, and it's like it's hard to make a clearer decision. Even at a week away from it, your head's clear, but it's not as clear as it is a month later, or 3 months later, or 6 months later. Mm-hmm. So I think, give it a chance. What do you have to lose? Yeah. Like, seriously, what do you have to lose? For me, it was like, what do I have to lose? I'm already on a losing streak for 5 years, 6 years. Mm-hmm. So that I would say would be the one thing of giving it a chance. And, as far as other things go, that would be probably the most important thing for a newcomer. Yeah. Give it a chance. And then obviously as life goes on, there's certain fundamentals that just have to be 100%, in my opinion. Yeah.
That's really solid advice. Yeah. I like that, just to give it an honest shot. And yeah. That's what I did, and it sounds like that's what you did, and here we are. So
that's right.
You can learn more about Tony at TonyMandarich.com, and you can find his book, My Dirty Little Secrets, on Amazon. Thanks again for coming on the show, Tony.
Jonathan, it was a privilege to be on here, and thank you very much for having me.
Be sure to check out the show notes for all the info from today's episode. Sober Nation FM is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Sobriety Engine is a free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. This show is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle while supporting your sobriety, you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And again, whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Nation, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.